And we're going to start out with a good, energetic speaker. I met Susan just a few minutes ago, and she seems not only very smart, but she has a lot of good energy, and I think is going to be talking with us about a topic that is critical as a part of the portfolio of what makes a whole city. But first about Susan Crawford just a little bit. She has a very rich background. You'll read if you Google her, but her background in government, law, and education. She was a former member of the board of ICANN. Her focus, as I understand it, is really making high-speed internet access universal, affordable, and available for all. She's going to talk to us a little bit about that and related topics this morning. She is one of Fast Company's most influential women in technology. Please welcome the fellow from the Roosevelt Institute, Susan Crawford. Susan.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Susan Crawford. I'm a proud New Yorker. And I would have given a different talk, I think, yesterday, because I just got back from a quick trip to Geneva. And there's nothing quite as powerful in terms of engendering despair and hopelessness than coming in from JFK on my way to New York. And that story of connecting an airport to its city through infrastructure is at the heart of what a city can do to make its citizens' lives better. And I'm talking to you today about a directly parallel story, which is what a city can do to bring its citizens into the 21st century with ubiquitous fiber infrastructure. So we are, at this moment, living a future that is unevenly distributed. The entire world is going through an upgrade to fiber. Not all parts of the world, and particularly not yet in the United States. We're like, in the United States, we're as if we're monks still in the Abbey reading the very first books. Because the change from a non-fiber infrastructure to a fiber infrastructure around the world is as great as the change from no electricity to electrification. It's not just a difference in speed and capacity, it's a difference in quality of experience. So fiber, which is thin strands of glass through which light is pulsing, is actually cheaper as an infrastructure than copper in the long run. Its operating costs are lower. Capacity is almost unimaginable. And we'll be hearing from, particularly in South Korea, where people are watching multiple televisions and having multiple screen experiences, needing a gigabit of connectivity in their homes. Fiber is also immune to electrical interference, so it doesn't get messed with by other forms of communication. And we're all talking about ubiquitous smartphones in the city of tomorrow. Well, to make sure that everybody can connect, you're going to need fiber with open capacity around the city so that those mobile devices can be used in subways, everywhere to access city services and bring citizens into new jobs and new ways of making a living. So when we talk about fiber, we sort of wave our hands, look at all the things that are possible, lots of new jobs, new forms of educational applications. So far around the world, a minimum capacity speed for fiber is 100 megabits per second. In many countries, they've gone beyond that. But in the United States, we're not there yet, but that would be a minimum to be able to do all of these new things in homes and businesses. When people have available to them a cheap, ubiquitous fiber connection, they buy it. Uptake can get very high, which drives the economics, makes it cheaper in the long run to install. And I do believe this transition to fiber is inevitable around the world, just happening at a different rate. We know from studies in Europe that economic growth engendered by the availability of ubiquitous fiber infrastructure is great. Even a 1-point uptick in the GDP has dramatic effects on people's lives. Why it's inevitable? Just think every wall in this room could be a screen. Those screens will be very high resolution. They will demand very high capacity. We will be experiencing many devices at once. You may think, oh, that's ridiculous, but remember, your electrical outlet in your home or business doesn't serve just one device. you have gazillions of devices plugged in. Same thing for fiber infrastructure. We'll have many screens, high resolution. We'll need that capacity in order to take advantage of the new advances in medicine, health, and education. So the problem for cities and nations around the world that aren't making this fiber transition just yet is that incentives between the current operators and citizens are not necessarily aligned. So there's plenty of money sloshing around the world that could be invested in infrastructure like ubiquitous fiber, but the current operators have no particular incentive in many places to do it. Studies have shown that in Europe, it would take more than 90 years to make this upgrade to fiber if we wait for the incumbents to do it themselves. Without any competitive threats or oversight, we'll see no change. Now, why is this happening? Just a very quick overview. With existing copper infrastructure in the ground, people's retirement plans will be safer if they just leave it there, and it's called sweat the copper, just grind more money out of it, make it serve as long as possible without upgrading, plow your money into dividends and buybacks rather than actually investing in new infrastructure. In the United States, we've got a special problem, which is that cable distributors are gaining monopolies on high-speed internet access infrastructure across the country. So they're going to account for more than 85% of high-speed connections, and the cable guys never enter each other's markets, don't compete, and provide asymmetrical connections, by which I mean downloads are fast, but uploads aren't. So we've got a special problem here. In the United States, a lot of people are being left behind for having internet access at all. Here's a picture to remind you of this. A mother taking her child to a library parking lot to be able to get online. This is the problem in Western Massachusetts, not in some far-flung center of the United States. Here's the cable story. The rich are getting gouged, poor are often left out, and for more than 85% of people who want 25 megabits per second service, they'll have to go to their local cable monopoly. Verizon is selling fiber, but they've backed off. They're only covering 14% of the country. So for most people, you have just one choice. That's our special problem in the United States. This is the uneven distribution of the future. South Korea way ahead on putting fiber in. Seoul is moving to a gigabit per second service, upload and download. That's 100 times faster than the usual connection in the United States. Japan also way ahead, China. Asia in general, taking this all very seriously. United States is somewhere in the middle of the pack. By regions, another version of the same story. Asia penetration, homes passed much higher. North America lagging, and Europe even farther behind with the EU5 down with only 6% of households passed, and North Africa and the Middle East even lower. Here's another visualization of some of this same information on a time scale. So you can see that way back in 2007, Japan and Korea took the step as a matter of industrial policy to make sure that their citizens had access to inexpensive fiber connections. The US not getting there quite yet, and Europe way off in somewhere past 2022, making this transition. Density matters. We'll talk about this on the panel. It's much more expensive to serve an area where there are fewer households. So finding ways to finance more thinly populated places is a problem for building fiber infrastructure. 80% of the cost of laying fiber is labor, so ripping up the streets and putting it in, and it does get expensive. For denser areas, we're seeing prices of maybe $500 per household. For cities, dense cities, this represents an opportunity. Infrastructure can be rolled out more cheaply to multiple dwelling units. So the price of this access is directly tied to adoption. So again, in Korea, South Korea, and in Sweden, very inexpensive packages available for citizens. In Seoul, if you move into an apartment in Seoul, you have a choice of 3 fiber-to-the-home providers for $30 a month. 100 megabits per second service up and down, unthinkable for the United States. Google Fiber, that's its symbol, the multicolored rabbit, is bringing its services to Kansas City, and we're seeing very high uptake there, even at $70 a month. But the price has to go down for people to really adopt and get the advantage of this virtuous cycle of entrepreneurship, innovation, and economic growth. So on this panel, which is coming up, we'll talk about the various models that can be used to bring fiber infrastructure into cities. And they range from giving private actors free rein, which is essentially what we've got in the United States. We've deregulated this entire sector. There's no oversight for fiber builds in the United States, all the way to the public sector taking a very active role in making sure that there's an operator that then is providing service to its people. In Australia, we're seeing a big pitch to having a private sector actor running the network, but the public sector owning it, at least initially. Singapore, different model, government grants directly to an actor who builds a wholesale facility on which lots of retail competition can ride. Stockholm, we are lucky to have today someone who knows a lot about Stockholm and its story, Herman Wachter, who will talk about, I hope, the wholesale operator set up by the city with private and public funding, which then makes available, again, a reliable substrate for lots of retail competition. Suggestions for cities range widely, everything from making sure that there's a wholesale fiber ring in your city running through, let's say, the subway or some other infrastructure, available at a very predictable price as an input into retail competition. Chicago is moving in this direction right now, and Seoul carried out its plans this way. Mayor Emanuel of Chicago wants to make Chicago the Seoul of the United States, so good luck to him. And a key element here is to make sure that fiber availability is at a constant price so that competitors can count on that and build on top of it. And in New York, we've got a big problem with the landlords who are finding ways to create de facto exclusive relationships, making it difficult for competitive fiber operators to show up. So lots of suggestions for cities, and I hope we'll get into a good deal of this on the panel. For countries, the United States is seeing a real vacuum of policy in this area at the moment. We're going to need to figure out ways to fund people in rural areas to make sure that their builds are subsidized. Remember that it's more expensive to do this in non-urban, less dense areas, and everybody should be paying into such a system, including the cable operators, to make sure that everybody gets service. Getting access to capital is the key issue, particularly in the United States. So finding ways to make patient capital available that will pay out over 20 years or so will help the fiber be put into place. In Sweden and in other countries, cities are taking a lead role to make sure that their citizens are served. In the United States, this is now either difficult or impossible in 19 of our 50 states because the incumbents have passed legislation blocking municipalities for doing this for themselves. So that's a big policy problem for countries. Lots of different ways to finance fiber, and I hope we'll discuss this on the panel coming up. But the big thought, the only thought I get, the only thought I want to leave you with as I leave the stage is that this issue is just like electrification. And electrification was very expensive, took a while to spin out over countries and cities, but sparked the imagination. We get a lot of these words from the electrification movement. He's a live wire. You know, they had a real electricity between them. We thought electricity was magical when it first showed up. Well, in Kansas City, every part of society is talking about fiber. In the supermarket, you know, they're all excited about this because of the opportunities it's going to bring to the people of that city. For us in America, Kansas City is our World's Fair of fiber infrastructure. Electrification didn't take off in the early 20th century until people saw what was possible with electrification in their homes. The World's Fair demonstrated that. Kansas City is going to do that for us in the States for fiber. We need our imagination to be sparked because right now our incumbents and policy are not aligning in ways that are going to bring us this unevenly distributed upgrade. So when you think about fiber as a city manager, it's just like your tree canopy, your street grid, the availability of, you know, clean water and electrification. At the moment, in many areas of the world, this is treated like a luxury, and it really shouldn't be. It's just an input into everything else that citizens do. So that's what I'm here to tell you about. Electrification is the analogy for fiber. We have a long way to go, particularly in the United States. But if we can fix the financing problems, understand what models are going to ensure fiber to be built and competitive providers to roll out, there are great advantages to be had for citizens and society. A wired city is an empowered city, is one in which its citizens feel as if they have autonomy and agency and can be part of the governing process. So when you go home tonight, turn on that electrical light, think about what it took to get electricity there, and compare yourself to what's going on in Seoul, in Amsterdam, in Paris, in many cities around the world where they've made the decision to ensure that fiber infrastructure exists. Thanks very much.